Okay, taking a look here at the Becker 754. This is kind of a repair restore, kind of go over. This unit was a dead unit, not responding to power, not even showing the dashes or going into theft mode. This was one of the eBay purchases here that I got kind of real cheaply for parts of repair bid. Showing you what I did to actually go over it and get it all functional again. This is for an advanced technician only. Do not try this if you have no prior electronics experience, because this is very delicate and you will damage the radio beyond repair because of its delicateness. You remove these two screws on the top after removing the cover. This board will pry up, and once you're up into this board here, one of the first things that you will want to check here, you'll want to check the condition of this battery. And if this battery, this is a 1987 battery, by the way, and it's still, after almost 30 years, holding its charge, so that's good. They're a special lithium battery. You can get this battery in a replacement, but as long as this battery is holding, then we should be good. The radio, we may have to reload it at some point. This one here needed a reload because of the nature of the capacitors were failing all along in this area. All of these electrolytics will need to be replaced, and oftentimes these electrolytics are leaking, so you will take some denatured alcohol, Q-tips, and brush or whatever that you have and clean these areas. Also around these resistor leads, anything near the caps, you will find discoloration, and you may have to, if they don't clean up real nicely like some of these have, you may actually have to replace some of these resistors. Cleanliness is one of the most things that you must do here. You must thoroughly clean up, and that involves removing the capacitor carefully with wick or solder sucker. Do a cleaning job. Even this one here, I had to remove the transistor here and the transistor here and here as well, and clean under these transistors and clean the legs off of the transistors because there was some residue from the capacitors. Also, I had to thoroughly clean this socket with denatured alcohol, these pins, and also these pins that are the actual connections become corroded, and they become brittle sometimes, so be very careful with these pins not to bend them. And these are the contacts that connect through these holes and make connections. So these will clean up if they're not too badly corroded. This one here was actually really bad, and it did clean up nicely. Just if you have one to break off, your only other option that's easy is to actually unsolder here, tack you a wire to that position, neatly run it up through the hole, and find from here where the circuitry goes and solder it back to the board. Tap it into the circuit. Do not try to attach it here. There is occasions where this board needs to be swung open for service, and if you solder in right here, it really makes it almost impossible to get it through to remove it the next time. So do not solder to these connections here. Bring it through the hole and solder it onto the board. The cassette deck and so forth is removable, and you will find those two screws under the faceplate of this radio. So So you will remove this faceplate. Be very careful. I like to go ahead, the tape equalization switch, push it in, and the Dolby switch, push it in. That helps kind of keep from breaking the switch off. Pull it out from the side, wiggle it off here from the side. There is a lock right here. You'll see this lock. Make sure it is unlocked before removing the faceplate. And you'll see there is a couple of notches in the corner that hold that in, and the socket here. On that faceplate, if you have some LCD segments that are out, you can carefully look under here, and you will find that these plastic tabs are broken. So you can actually get some really small jeweler's drill bit and disassemble this faceplate. These screws here will take the metal front off of the plate. Do not remove the screws going into the plastic. There's one on this side, and there's one here on this side. And do not remove the plastic screws, or the front buttons will come off. The volume and the tune button will come off, and there is a little set of contacts, ball and spring, and they are very difficult, trust me, very difficult to put back. Almost impossible. So you want to avoid that separation at all costs. But you can successfully drill and kind of retap these with a very fine, short watch type screw that you can actually bond this display back down to this board here. And that will fix any kind of display issues you have from segments not showing up. Again, the cassette deck can be removed. Screw here, and the screw over here on this side. This board here, the little red insert here, is locking this in place. So you unlatch this little red insert. You can slide this board out at this point. Be very careful with the pins not to put any stress or bending on any of these pins. Again, they may need to be cleaned up. This area here, electrolytic capacitors are bad about leaking, especially around the synthesizer area. The pins on the synthesizer will more than likely have to be cleaned up with some denatured alcohol. The ribbon cable unplugs here very cautiously with this ribbon cable. If any separation starts on this ribbon cable after you've unplugged it, you may have to use some Scotch Super 33 vinyl electrical tape to kind of reform everything here. So be very careful with these pins here. Out of all the radios I've gotten, I have not had to replace the belts yet. These belts seem to be fairly good on all 5 radios that I have went through so far in eBay purchases, trying to get a working radio with the load in it that wasn't already wiped out. That's going to be the critical part, and there'll be another video in reset of this radio and how to reset it, what tool I have built to reset this radio with, and how to build one, and how to try to do this yourself. All of these electrolytic capacitors here, clean the board very well, and you may have to replace resistors if there's any corrosion on the resistors themselves. Luckily, all of these have cleaned up nicely. That's been the big issue. Change electrolytic capacitors, especially any of the small voltage values like the 25 volt range. The ones that had the 50 volt rating at like a 50 volt 2.2 microfarads, 50 volts at 1 microfarad I believe it was, and maybe 50 volt at 4.7. seemed to be okay for the most part, but there was 100 microfarad, I believe, at 25 volt maybe, that was leaking around the relay here, and it was actually responsible for a lot of corrosion near the pins, and had to go through a lot of cleaning. As you can see here in some of the images here, that this was how bad the corrosion was around these pins, but yet these pins cleaned up very nicely. These wires here on the back of this board here, the red wire here is the actual security connection here. This is actually going to the security connector, and if you're doing a bypass on this, you can actually remove that red wire off of that security connector, and that will put a bypass on this radio to keep that from tripping. Again, we'll go over the RAM chip and what's needed to build a tool to reload this with, as most of the dealers no longer have the tool, and contacting some of the service centers want to charge you around close to $200, you know, and that's not including shipping, to even go in, replace all these electrolytics. Most average TV shops or repair centers can clean up and replace these little small amount of electrolytics that's in this radio for a lot less. These two coaxes here can be unsoldered after you remove this lid. There is a few capacitors under here. This bottom caged in area here does not need to be opened up. There is no electrolytics inside of here, so it should be okay for the most part. The biggest thing is clean, clean, and clean. Can't stress cleaning enough, and replacing the electrolytics, and that shall get you going on most of the restorations. Most of the ICs are pretty reliable, and most of the ICs are very much standard, except for the RAM IC here, and the microprocessor, which has internal software in that we can't get. So, but most of the time those components are good. When you're latching this back in, be very careful that none of the electrolytics or any of the wiring has gotten in the way of any of these contacts. You know, make for sure that this wiring here, which is a ground going up here to this terminal on the board, make sure all of these wires are neatly tucked away, and none of the capacitors are been bent over in the way of these pins. Anything that will bend these pins, it is a nightmare to try to recover from a bent pin. So let's try not to do that. They have little notches. You'll see here little tabs to help guide you in on all of these boards, and you can slowly kind of get an idea. You'll see these guides start coming through. They start coming through the holes, and you'll notice that as long as the guides, you should not have to put in any excessive force on here. You can get kind of halfway on it here, and if you feel any kind of resistance at all, verify that all your pins are starting to come up through the hole. You should see them start peeking through the holes, and as long as you see all of them clearly peeking through the holes, you should be fine, and you'll be able to go ahead here and just re-snap your board back in. You'll be putting your screws back in, of course. One other thing to note, be very careful when you remove this tape deck. This guide right here, this metal guide right here that's attached to the faceplate, is very difficult. You have to kind of gently plug this board in at the same time you're trying to put the tape deck in. Careful not to abuse the ribbon cable on the cassette deck too much, because this cable is very fragile. this board will probably have to be plugged in very carefully as you're installing the tape deck. Don't forget to get this little coax cable here. It's got a little slot in this board right here where it goes through, so be careful. Make for sure you get this started in as you're getting this board in. So there's a lot of trickiness in installing the cassette deck itself. The cassette deck power cable plugs into the main board at the bottom. Do not attempt to take the bottom loose and raise this bottom board up, even though it is hinged. But you have the output amplifiers attached to the heatsink that you will break off, and the voltage regulators are mounted to the heatsink. In all the radios I've done, I have never had to remove this bottom board. I was always able to remove the two daughter boards here, the cassette deck, and clean up every bit of the capacitors and replace them without removing this bottom board. It's just a real pain to have to remove these regulators and output amplifiers when you don't really have to. So good luck. Hope that does the restoration. And if you need to reload your radio after you're done, the next video we'll be doing a reset on one of these radios and how we can reset it even though we can't find the dealer tool, and we'll have to build our own tool to reset it.